This episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast is presented by Sling. Coming up this week, we've got the end of the Premier League season and also the title race in Ligue 1. And also, too, we've got the FIFA U20 World Cup. All of them are available through Sling TV. Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast. On this episode, we discuss many topics, including the title race in the Bundesliga, the relegation battle in the Premier League, also in terms of the Football League, some of the playoffs happening and some of the really incredible Cinderella stories. And of course, we have to talk about MLS Season Pass yet again. Still in the news for all the wrong reasons for the most part. My name is Christopher Harris. I'm joined by Kartik Krishnaiyer, who's my guest. He's not my guest. He's my co-host. Kartik, you and I have been doing this podcast in different iterations since, 2006. So it's like 17 long years. And in that time, obviously I've gotten to know you very well. I think we actually probably met originally kind of at least remotely through the podcast, where you were listening to some of the shows and we had you come on, and then all of a sudden, over many years, developed a great friendship and relationship all these years. And from time to time, we'd meet in person, oftentimes at a soccer match in Fort Lauderdale or Miami, or the actual International Champions Cup or a friendly. And from time to time, you and I, we'd hang out with your dad. Your dad would drive us to Miami to catch a flight, or we would see him at Lockhart. And unfortunately, for anyone who doesn't know, Kartik, of course, your dad passed away last Friday. And on behalf of everyone at World Soccer Talk, the listeners who have been listening to this podcast for many years, who feel in many ways that we know you, Kartik, just as well as anyone, because you are very heartfelt, very, very, very honest and transparent. So on behalf of everyone, we'd like to pass along our condolences to you and your family. Your dad was a great man.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, and he loved this show. He loved World Soccer Talk, and he loved the sport. And ironically enough, we had just recorded our last edition of this podcast when I went out to the family room. I was at my parents' house, went out to the family room. A cousin of mine was here, and we were put under a severe thunderstorm warning. And my father told my cousin to go home, try and beat the rain, and was looking forward to watching Manchester City and Borussia Dortmund this weekend, and Bayern in any number of matches. In fact, had watched Fiorentina and not Fiorentina, Roma and Leverkusen the previous day, and was alert and had all his faculties, although he was slowing down because of his cancer. And 5 minutes later, he was walking to the bathroom. I was walking behind him in case he fell, and my mother was in front of him, and he collapsed, and that was it. And we don't have an actual cause of death, but talking to doctors and some of the doctors who are in our family who've come into town for the services that we're having later this week, they believe it was actually the blood wasn't clotting as a reaction to, and then there was organ failure, multiple organ failure due to the effects of the treatment, not the cancer itself. And so that's a difficult thing to take. I mean, it's good that he still had his faculties intact until the very last minute. And as I said, had watched Roma versus Leverkusen the previous day, and was going to watch the Heat game Friday night, and was going to watch soccer over the weekend. And he had been slowing down. But this is just a reminder that sometimes the cancer treatments can cause this sort of thing. He was not in pain though, and we had actually met with the doctor Friday morning, and he had expressed that to the doctor that he was out of pain. So the treatment took him out of pain, but caused a counter reaction or another reaction because they're just injecting chemicals between both immunotherapy and chemotherapy into your body So we don't know for sure, but that appears to be what happened. And I want to thank everybody the last few days for their condolences and their statements of love. And some of the people in the soccer media world, Chris, are the people who reached out to me first. People who
Mhm.
work at ESPN, people who work at Fox, and people who work in other places, work for Apple, etc. So I really appreciate that and all the love. And some of these people are the same people my dad watched every weekend. So that was really heartfelt and cool and made me feel very good about it. So thank you to everybody.
Yeah, and it just goes to show how sudden things can be sometimes. Where for all of us, really, in terms of our loved ones, give them a hug, tell them I love you, give them a phone call, just to make sure that they know. And obviously they know, but sometimes it's great to hear that. So yeah, I'm sure it's been a very difficult time, Kartik, but in some ways, this past weekend was kind of a ray of sunshine in terms of football, at least on the soccer fields, because there were three stories I know that when they were happening, I was like, wow, Kartik must be at least maybe a little bit of a smile at some of these things, including Stockport County, as well as the Bundesliga title race, Nottingham Forest. There's probably a few other storylines too that may have brought a smile to your face this weekend and some comfort, knowing that these are stories that you're obviously a hardcore soccer fan, as I am, and as are many of the listeners. But sometimes, we hope that some of those underdog stories do rise up, and it's looking like some of these may happen. This is some big deals in the Bundesliga, especially. But what for you, Kartik, in terms of what you were able to kind of follow and watch this past weekend? What brought you the most ray of sunshine and most kind of positive thoughts when you saw it?
I hate to be so philosophical about it, but I think it is the Bundesliga title race because I know one of the great disappointments the last month or month and a half of my father's life, as it turns out, was that Borussia Dortmund Bayern Munich match. Um, at the Allianz
Right, the
last month.
blowout.
Yeah, yeah, and he specifically wanted kept commenting about that match after the match, and so the irony of this is I am tracking the score of the match as I drive to the funeral home. My wife Beth and I, and my cousin drive to the funeral home on Saturday to make arrangements. For the transfer of the body and the services and everything. And it's 1-0 Bayern the whole time against Leipzig. We have the meeting with the funeral home director and go through that very difficult process. And as
Mhm.
we're walking out of the funeral home back to the car, I open my phone up, go to the FootMob app, 3-1 Leipzig. And that did put a smile on my face. I know it's a time of grieving, but it's also a time of perspectives and joy. So that was pretty amazing. And when you mentioned Forest, that is wonderful, Chris. But I have to feel for Leicester. I know maybe we'll get into that during this podcast. And then on Stockport, yes, I was. That was the other game I was tracking Saturday morning. The Forest Arsenal match I found out about later, and that's fantastic for Forest. They got the results when they needed them late in the season, but I do feel for Leicester because Leicester has been on top. For those of you who don't know the geography of England very well, Leicester has natural rivalries with Nottingham Forest and with Coventry City. And now we're looking at a situation where Leicester, who were FA Cup winners 2 seasons ago, were in the top four most of uh, two successive seasons when they fell to fifth, just very recently in this kind of post COVID period, could be third of those three clubs next season if Coventry gets promoted. So I do have a little bit of compassion for Leicester in all of this, although I guess every dog has their day and they've had their day. But the Forest thing makes me a little. I think you probably feel differently, Chris, but makes me a little sad because of Leicester.
Yeah, Nottingham Forest. That's one that we've spoken about quite a bit on this podcast. When they were in the Championship, and when Steve Cooper joined them, Nottingham Forest were bottom of the Championship when he joined them from Swansea to coach Nottingham Forest. And during that season, kind of following them all the way through, to the promotion, we talked about that on the podcast pretty extensively and said, hey, if you're not a fan of Nottingham Forest or you watch the Premier League, you may not kind of realize how big of a deal Nottingham Forest coming back into the league. This would have been last summer. How big of a deal this is, them coming back into the league for historical purposes, definitely in terms of tradition and Brian Clough and just Peter Taylor and the team from the late 70s, early 80s, but also the fan base too. So the fan base, Mull Kintyre, kind of a football anthem that most soccer fans in the United States would have never heard. And then this season, hopefully a few times they may have heard clips of it on social media or on NBC broadcasts when they weren't talking over it. But also the city ground itself and just the history and just the fan base. And you could see all season long, even when they were bottom of the table, even when they were fighting and going through some tough times, how the fans backed them all the way and all the way to the very end. So for me, I'm not a Nottingham Forest fan, but being a fan of Steve Cooper, yeah, absolutely. As a coach who did great things for Swansea, sad to see him go, and he goes on to Forest and accomplishes even greater things there. And I wouldn't be surprised too in the next 12 months, maybe perhaps, that if he continues, he might move on to a bigger club, just as Graham Potter did from Swansea to Brighton and then up to Chelsea and back down again. But such as the world of football managers. Yeah, Leicester, I don't have as much. Yes, I would like to see them do well. I'd like to see them stay up. But I think in many ways, I mean, in terms of on the pitch, again, it's like a lot of players seem to be sleepwalking. It's as if they don't realize how much peril they're in. When obviously, if you look at the table, you know how much of a peril you're in. And going into this last weekend, this weekend, both Leeds and Leicester, even if they win their matches, they both may get relegated depending on other results. So it's now out of their hands. But yeah, in terms of Leicester, it's sad to see kind of the decline. But to me, that's the beauty of promotion and relegation. There is accountability. So if you're not good enough, you're not getting the results, you go down, no matter, even if you're a previous Premier League winner just a few years ago.
Yeah, and you can't rest on your laurels. Leicester finished 8th last season, and there were a lot of Leicester supporters who thought that was too low because they had become accustomed to 5th place finishes. I remember they sacked Claude Puel when he, I think, had them in the top half because the football wasn't good enough. They had obviously won the Premier League. They won the FA Cup. They won the Community Shield. Recently, they were in the top 4 for most of those seasons. But you're absolutely right, Chris. I wrote an article at Beyond the 90, I think now about 2 months ago, which was entitled Leicester Are Too Good Not to Go Down. And my premise was that they had so many high-level players, so many guys who are top 4 or top 6 level players in the Premier League. Madison, Ndidi, Harvey Barnes, an older Johnny Evans, but still he's that kind of high-end player, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Tielemans might be the most visible one, that they didn't have the fight in them, that if they actually got sucked into the relegation scrap, they would go down. Unfortunately, that was prophetic because I was absolutely correct about that. Now, the flip side of that is I thought that you could apply a similar principle in an opposite way to Forest in saying that they had brought in too many new players who were high-level players, not quite the high level of the Leicester players, not guys that were getting England caps and getting caps for Belgium or starting World Cup matches, but still guys that were coming from other leagues that may not understand English football, and those guys may not be up for the scrap either. And I thought at that point they would both go down and Leeds would stay up with Everton. I thought it would be Southampton, Leicester, and Forest. And as it turns out, those guys at Forest, a lot of them are Brazilians. They really came through. I mean, I'm impressed with the buys that Forest made, particularly of the Brazilian guys. I think those guys have been especially impactful.
Yeah, I would argue that Brendan Rodgers, if he had stayed at Leicester, probably would have figured out a way to keep them up. Would have gotten a result here or there. I mean, Dean Smith is a good manager too, but he's gone through this so many times in terms of, unfortunately, being put into a position that's a very difficult position, and ends up going down, and then has to try to get a job at a championship club, and then try to get back into the Premier League, or get transferred to another Premier League club as far as a manager goes. I would argue Brendan Rodgers probably, if he had stayed, Leicester could have had a better chance, could have gotten a few more points in some of these games. The same could be said too at Bayern Munich, right? Maybe they should have kept Julian Nagelsmann in charge, because under Thomas Tuchel, they're doing
Yeah,
much
yeah.
worse. Leeds United, Jesse Marsch, you could say perhaps maybe Javi Gracia wasn't the right move if they stuck with Jesse Marsch. For all, the
And
positives
Southampton.
and
South,
negatives.
Southampton absolutely under Hasenhüttl are somewhere. Maybe they're not safe, but I think they're above 30 points.
Yeah, for sure.
That sacking still to me is the most shocking of all. And bringing in an untested Nathan Jones, they just those are new owners, and the analysis of them in the English media, Sport Republica, I think is what they're called. The analysis of them in the English media has been really critical, and there's a general sense among pundits that even though Southampton are going to finish dead last, they're going to finish with 24 points probably. That Hasenhüttl, even if he hadn't saved them, they would still be fighting till the last weekend if they hadn't made that very, very strange decision. And I think it is new owners who wanted their own people. That's really what it was, and that was an insanely stupid thing to do.
Yeah, it does happen where it's the right move to make. As Aston Villa being the perfect example, getting rid of Steven Gerrard, and Aston Villa now, trying to fight for a place in Europe. It doesn't always work that way, but yeah, I think Leicester, Southampton, Leeds, Bayern Munich really have made some mistakes in terms of the decisions that they made during the season. And Bayern Munich, really, again, if Borussia Dortmund win this weekend, it's their title, and that would be fantastic to see. It's the first time in 12 years that Bayern Munich has not won the title, so it'll make it interesting. And that's the thing, right? With both also Serie A. The race for Champions League spots, that's wide open, especially with Juventus getting the 10-point deduction. So now you have a bunch of teams, basically kind of 2 through 6 or 7, fighting for Champions League spots, as well as Europa League and Europa Conference League.
The last thing I'll say about the Bundesliga race is the irony of this season is every year we have a situation where Dortmund seems to be keeping Bayern within touching distance, and then they fall away in March or April. What happened this season was that at the World Cup break, Bayern were they weren't 8 points clear in the table. They were only a few points clear. I think Union was in second, and Freiburg was up there at the time. But they were 8 or 9 points clear. I think it was 9 points clear of Dortmund. And so we were all saying to one another, Dortmund, this is their worst Dortmund team in years. What's happened? On paper, they should be really good. And it was Bayern who let Dortmund back into the race repeatedly. And Dortmund, who had to, despite losing to Bayern in that match I talked about, which my late father watched with me, that Dortmund's the team that did the chasing and chased them down, which is what Bayern normally do. So real role reversal, and the panic in hiring Tuchel indicates what's happening in the broader picture at Bayern. Apparently, and this is according to those who cover German football, and Archie Rintut, who Kyle interviewed last week or the week or whenever it was recently.
Yeah, last week.
This past week. According to him and others, that this is now a very dysfunctional Bayern board and backroom. It's very much like the old FC Hollywood moniker we used to give Bayern in the late 90s and early 2000s, because there was much more drama off the pitch than on the pitch. Archie Rintut and Jan Argefort and a number of the other people who cover German football on our televisions here in the United States or in print have indicated that has happened again. Bayern, this intrigue and stuff began before Dortmund chased them down a few months ago. It had started during the World Cup break. It had started with Manuel Neuer's skiing accident, and has just snowballed. So it feels like with all of that going on, Dortmund will see this out and beat Mainz on Saturday and lift the title, and Bayern will go trophyless. Because the other thing is, under Tuchel, they've been knocked out of the German Cup and Champions League right away. So
Yeah.
you could argue, even if Dortmund had won the Bundesliga with Nagelsmann, they may have gotten to the German Cup final. They may have gotten past, or at least put up more of a fight against Manchester City in the Champions League, and things would not feel as desperate as they do for Bayern right now.
Do you think if Dortmund does win the title, that will have any impact on ESPN Plus viewing numbers? Even though we wouldn't know what those numbers were, but in terms of the popularity of the Bundesliga in the United States, would that make a difference?
Depends how much they promote this. I think that there was an effort to promote the title race by ESPN, but then um, it kind of fizzled or fell to second or third priority in their talking points about soccer. But I do think that this gives them an opportunity to really promote the Bundesliga. They're in year 3 of a 5-year deal, so they have 2 more years after this. They have done a very good job of promoting La Liga this year and moving La Liga games to linear television, which has been really good for the viewers late on in the season, moving championship matches to linear television. And obviously, there'll be more championship matches to pick from next season because of the new domestic TV deal in the UK. So there'll be more high level television coverage of more championship matches than in the past. So I think there's some positive signs for ESPN in terms of EFL, La Liga, and Bundesliga and how they covered. And then the other thing I should mention is uh, we haven't talked about this yet on this podcast. During this title race, even though the matches have been on ESPN Plus and they have only moved a few matches to ABC or ESPN, there has been a full studio for Bundesliga matches involving Bayern or Borussia Dortmund. So Kay Murray has been hosting, generally Ali Moreno, Shaka Hislop in the studio, maybe Craig Burley, and then their reporters, Archie Rintut and others in Germany. So they have upped their coverage. They have upped their game. Whether people are actually aware of it or not, I'm not sure. And that's a whole other issue.
Yeah, that's my concern. So I think this is if Dortmund does win the title, this is great news. There's nothing bad about it. My concern is also kind of what happened to Liga in the United States. I mean, a couple of years ago, Lille won the title. But if you ask most soccer fans, in the United States, they'll just say, "Yeah, PSG wins the title every year." Well, that's not the case because they're not paying as much attention to that league as they should be or as they are. So that's my concern with the Bundesliga is that yes, hopefully they'll win the title because that's the best thing for the Bundesliga to make it more competitive. I just hope that, especially this weekend, with the title race being over in the Premier League, that people will pay attention to Saturday. So hopefully Saturday will be a massive thing. It's on ESPN Plus. As of right now, I don't think there's any plans to have that on television. That would certainly help right at the last minute, but we'll see. We're recording this on Tuesday. The game's not until this weekend.
Yeah, and then in fact, immediately after, they could show the EFL Championship playoff final, Luton and Coventry from Wembley.
Yeah.
That's on Saturday. Also, that's on immediately after these leagues didn't work it out, but this works out beautifully for ESPN. If they had wanted to do something on linear, they could have shown the Dortmund game or even the Bayern game, right? Bayern and Cologne on at 9:30 Eastern, and then the playoff final at 11:30 Eastern. But there doesn't seem to be any indication that they're going to do that. Again, we don't know the ESPN Plus numbers. You keep stressing that, Chris. This is, I guess, working in the favor of some people who like to say that the numbers are higher than maybe they really are. Seeing that with the Apple situation and the reaction to a World Soccer Talk article in the last 24 hours about that. But we don't know the numbers on ESPN Plus. So it's possible lots and lots of people are watching and there would be no real boost on linear. However, I think probably there would be some sort of boost by moving it to linear.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I'm sure later in the week, maybe on Friday when we record the end of the week podcast, we'll talk more about Coventry and Luton, that final, as well as maybe we'll have some good news to share about the Bundesliga's big game this Saturday. Maybe we'll have some TV details to share. One more thing before we go to the listener mailbag, and that's just from this past weekend watching soccer from around the world. I must say MLS Season Pass and the MLS 360 broadcast was much, much better this week. And reason being is that there were more meaningful games because it was the rivalry week. So you had a lot of matches with, local derbies or regional derbies, some big games. The fans were pumped up. The actual soccer on the pitch was more exciting. A lot of drama back and forth. 3-1s, 3-2s, lots of goals, some good skill. So for me, it was in isolation. That was a really good night of MLS soccer, and watching it on MLS 360, having them do the production of the Whip Around show with all the guests, and Kevin Egan now in the role as the host or co-host, at least temporarily. I think is doing a great job, really, really engaging. We're a big fan of Kevin's work and the rest of the crew. Sasha Kleiston, to me, is kind of the one of BWP. Sasha really impresses me week after week in terms of his level of knowledge, but also how he is on camera and the things he says, the analysis, and also I think it helps to him having a playing career in Major League Soccer, knowing a lot of these players, but also playing in Europe and talking about playing in Belgium and kind of the things he learned there, and then carrying it across into his analysis. So good things. In isolation, if that was every weekend like that, I think a lot more people would be interested in MLS Season Pass and MLS 360. So by Major League Soccer making the move to make MLS 360 available for free in more places than ever before, free on YouTube, free on Apple TV, free on Apple TV Plus, it's a good thing because it gets that program out to more people to make them aware of MLS Season Pass and MLS 360, with the hopes that the entertainment will continue week in, week out, and more people will sign up. I have my doubts because I've watched the whole season thus far, pretty much every weekend except for one or two, and some weekends are not so good. This one was a good one, though. All right, let's move on to... Well, actually, before we move on, Kartik, the funny thing about all of this is that we've gotten so much criticism at World Soccer Talk about sharing the numbers of people that were watching the YouTube broadcast of MLS 360 from this past weekend, that we got so much kind of pushback, people saying like, you guys hate MLS. If anything... The funny thing is, we're probably one of the biggest fans of MLS Season Pass and everything that they've done, the production, the work. Yes, it's not perfect, nothing is, but we're big fans of that. And but still, there's still a lot of people that when they look at numbers, they're put on the defensive, and I think they're reacting back and saying like, you guys are trying to mislead people. Well, the numbers are the numbers, and those are the only numbers we know of that have been made available. And roughly about 20,000 people watched at some point, or 20,000 views of MLS 360.
Right. Total views.
And for me personally, so I have access to MLS Season Pass, but for me it was easier to watch MLS 360 through YouTube. So, but because that we have those 20,000 total views, that doesn't mean that those are all new people. It could be like myself. It's just easier to watch it on YouTube. And then also, in addition to that too, I went back and forth a few times. So every time I go back and forth and log out and come back in to watch it on YouTube, that counts it as another view. So the actual number of people that actually watched that broadcast would have been much, much smaller than the 20,000. All right, let's move on to listener mailbag. First up is Kyle. Kyle says, good podcast as always. I saw the news on Kartik's Twitter about his father passing away. I'm sending my condolences to him, his friends, and family. In regards to MLS 360, I tried to watch it on YouTube and ended up turning it off. Soccer is supposed to be commercial-free during the matches, but in the first half of the 7:30 Eastern Time games alone, they cut to multiple commercial breaks or stops away from the action. They're shooting themselves in the foot with this. How are you going to be able to get people to want to tune in to the product that shows all of the MLS teams, but stops showing parts of the games and could miss important parts of the matches, such as goals, cards, etc.? Are they trying to get people to turn off that product? It seems like whatever they do the wrong thing. Yeah, so this is one we've gotten a lot of criticism over in the past before too, because I mean, for me, I was okay with having the TV commercials because you had MLS 360 that was behind a paywall, um, and you know, I mean, MLS 360 is an enormous undertaking in terms of production costs, etc. So Apple has launched their own advertising network, and a lot of these ad buys that these brands have on MLS 360, I mean, helps kind of basically finance the running of MLS Season Pass in many ways. But now that it's available for free on YouTube and other places, it is a bit weird because you're watching it on YouTube, you're watching the, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes of good discussion, then it breaks for a commercial on YouTube. However, they're not running commercials on YouTube. It's just dead air. It shows a picture of the studio, and that's it, silence. So you're sitting there for 2 to 3 minutes, probably closer to 3 minutes, and then it comes back on. And so if you're watching a YouTube video, I mean, the tendency is when that commercial hits and you're not seeing anything other than dead air, is change the channel. So that's one thing I think they'll have to figure out is can they create a separate feed for those commercial breaks where they're showing, I don't know, some B-roll or something of entertainment, because otherwise it's just like this listener says, it's going to turn people off, like Kyle says.
Yeah, thank
So
you, Kyle, for those well wishes, and I agree with your analysis, Chris.
yeah, and then Footy Canuck says, I signed up for MLS Season Pass at the beginning. I play fantasy MLS, and it's great fun. And I enjoy watching all the games on MLS Season Pass, focusing on Canadian teams. I watch MLS 360, but I still find it misses the mark, and they will be talking in studio while there are games on live. And that's true. Sometimes they do talk too much. I mean, that they've gotten better from what they were in the very beginning. However, sometimes there's games happening, but they're just talking in the studio or showing highlights of games from earlier in the day. And I'm like, come on, there's games happening. Show us the live coverage. So when they do show the live coverage and we do get to hear those commentators, to me, that's the best parts of the actual broadcast. Analysis is pretty decent, pretty good, sometimes better, sometimes not so great. But to me, I want to see those goals. Like Goal Rush, right? Goal Rush is all about the goals. Next up is Nicholas. Nicholas says, not sure if this question has been answered already, but are the MLS broadcasts on MLS Season Pass sped up at a certain point and slowed down at other times? I was watching Cincinnati against Columbus this past weekend, and the speed of playback speed and movement of the ball and players seemed unnaturally fast. Is my hunch true? Either way, it was jarring to watch. So yeah, I don't think that's happening. I'm sure it's happening in real time at normal playback speed live. But maybe there were some technical issues in between, and maybe something was, because basically, I mean, you're seeing live football just as you normally do. So yeah, I haven't noticed that, Nicholas, but maybe it was that particular broadcast of that game that night. Antonio says, I've tried to get through MLS 360 each week and have yet to be able to stomach this fluff. Combine that with mediocre skills on display during each match, and I can't help but feel that MLS is trying to sell AA baseball as MLS to the American consumer, and I think the consumer will wake up sooner rather than later. Minor league baseball is for the local audience, and that's what MLS is shaping up to be. The national audience won't follow the farm leagues simply because there is better skill and talent out there competing for our attention. Yeah, I mean, that hits the nail on the head. I mean, maybe a little bit too harshly in terms of comparing it to AA baseball or minor league baseball. Some leagues, some of the teams are much better than others. and certainly above kind of double A baseball level. But yeah, I mean that's this is the first time really when you think about it, Kartik, that MLS is out on their own, right? In the past, they would have been working with TV networks, but now this is their product. They define exactly how this is set up. Apple then goes ahead and makes all of the games available, but the ball is in Major League Soccer's court to go ahead and make this league as great as it can be. And in the past, before, you would have had perhaps on any given weekend, you would have had games in isolation. So you might have had a game on a Saturday afternoon at 2:30 on Fox, and that was the big game to watch. Then you'd maybe have another game afterwards on at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock on Univision. Then most of the 7:30 games on Saturday night would be on ESPN Plus, and ESPN Plus, we never got those numbers. I'm sure they weren't anything too great, but also they were on regional sports networks where, for the most part, again, those viewing numbers were not so great either. And then on Sunday, you'd have a game on FS1, maybe on or ESPN Game of the Week, and those games would be in isolation too. So I think where MLS is at, they're in a transition period. They've gone from what they were before, which was pretty comfortable. However, I mean, ESPN was on the record with us saying that they weren't happy with the TV ratings. We know that the Fox numbers were even worse than ESPN. Univision wanted to change things up and make things be more aggressive and try different things. And MLS seemed to be resistant to that. So really, I mean, the ball is in MLS's courts. They really have to do something with this. Otherwise, maybe the local entertainment option, like you said, Kartik, in previous weeks, maybe that's something they should get more comfortable with and go, okay, you know what? Let's put on a good local entertainment product and not be so concerned about national view numbers and how many people are subscribing, and then just keep on cashing those expansion checks, and maybe within themselves say, you know, we're not going to be able to compete with the Premier League or La Liga or the Bundesliga. We're comfortable in our own skin. What do you think, Kartik? Is that something that's reasonable, or do you think that Major League Soccer would never kind of face reality on something like that?
I think once they stop selling expansion franchises or clubs, they're technically not franchises in MLS, as I pointed out a few weeks ago. Uh, they legally they're not franchises. I don't want to get into the legalisms of what's a franchise, what's a branch office, etc. But um, I think at that point you do that. I think part of the fluff about them being a global player and having potentially all this media interest and media revenue is about selling expansion franchises or expansion clubs, expansion slots. Once they cap the league or are slow or growing more slowly, then I believe then they will retrench and focus on local and make themselves among the best entertainment offerings in each of their markets, because it is much more affordable to go to an MLS game than it is to go to an NFL, NBA, or MLB. Well, MLB can be cheaper, but it's one of 162 games, but certainly cheaper than the NBA or NFL, or going to a Broadway show, or going even you could argue a night at the movies with the family. You don't get the same sort of live entertainment, and it's almost as expensive. So I do think MLS does have that going for them. Now, that is what we do in lower division soccer in the United States. So can MLS ever have enough humility to pull back and admit that? Their attendances they get more people than the NBA do physically at games. They get more people than the NHL does. I don't consider the NHL to be a major sport. It's not in my mind. It is in the mind of the media, I think, because of some of their biases. But to me, there's three major team sports in the United States. Hockey is not one of them. But MLS gets better attendance than hockey. Than the top hockey league. It gets better attendance than the top basketball league. So there is potential for this. It's not working as a TV property. Now, could it in the future? Sure. I mean, we've offered, Chris, you and I have spent years offering solutions, none of which seem to have been implemented. So I do think we're talking about something realistically MLS will have to do at a certain point in the future.
Yeah, I think part of this, though, too, Kartik, is that Major League Soccer, especially MLS Commissioner Don Garber, total hype, right? Any press conference, I mean, it's really, really hypey. And if I go back through kind of the press clippings from previous years, there've been times when Don Garber said, by 2020 we're going to be one of the biggest leagues in the world, or we're going to be in the top five, or all these things, hypey things. And that's a good point, Kartik, too, because I think a lot of it too is building them up to be something bigger than what they are, and which helps with the expansion, right? So it helps with a conservative politician from the UK who goes ahead with partners, an Egyptian billionaire, and goes ahead and buys an expansion team in San Diego for $500 million. But the reality doesn't match the hype. The hype is that MLS is one of the top leagues in the United States. The reality is we look at the numbers and they don't match up. They don't, so it's great from the expansion side for MLS. It's great for sponsorships, bringing in these big level sponsors. But when you look at the numbers and you look at the interest in the league, they don't match up. Now, they could match up in the future, but not on its current path that they're on, that I believe. Roberto says the timing of these free offers has to be set to start with the end of European seasons. Hopefully, there will be some people who want to continue watching games, and the MLS Apple Pass for free may attract viewers. The money generated by adding the San Diego team will help cover the startup costs of MLS broadcasts. The ever-increasing numbers of academy players is beginning to improve the quality of play across the league, so any short-term dilution of quality may soon be resolved. John says, there is probably nothing they can do to make me care about MLS. I got the season for free, MLS Season Pass for free from T-Mobile, and I'm already a Apple TV person because of Ted Lasso. I tried to watch in the first 2 weeks and was just bored because most of the games mean nothing. The league the league has too many teams, and then the playoffs include something like 2/3 of them. So why bother with a regular season? Add in some weird camera angles, announcing that is truly hit or miss, and you have Major League Soccer. Pro Rel with an open membership system and an American Premiership at 20 or 24 teams, and I'll start to care. And we've heard a lot like this from basically fans that have subscribed to MLS Season Pass, or fans that have been with MLS for a long time. And I think a lot of them are, well, we've read out these comments and we've seen the feedback. A lot of people kind of throwing up their arms saying like, enough's enough. Next up is Glenn. Glenn says, I think you guys have covered all of the issues pretty well. I was one of DC United's original season ticket holders, having placed my deposit shortly after the World Cup, and remained a season ticket holder until the end of RFK, but decided against remaining one with the move to Audi Field when it became clear that the current front office didn't value me, so there was no reason for me to value them. Seeing those few $1,000s per year has worked out well for me, or saving those few $1,000s a year has worked out well for me. I've continued to follow the league, though, and I am one of the few, I presume, non-season ticket holders to plunk down $99 for MLS Season Pass on Apple. Since MLS didn't really have any options, it seemed like the Apple deal was pretty much the only choice they had. ESPN knew no one was watching any of the games on their main channel or on ESPN Plus. I presume the local outlets had next to zero viewers as well. I'm a bit surprised that neither MLS nor Apple has requested any sort of feedback with regards to the experience at this point. I can't buy a toothbrush without getting surveyed to death about it, but MLS doesn't seem to care about their viewer experience so far. I've long said that expansion is the only thing keeping MLS going at this point. They need to find some new suckers every couple of years to give them a few $100 million to keep the scheme going. While I suppose some teams do pretty well with their ticket revenue, there are so many that still play to virtually empty stadiums. As you guys have outlined here, there is so much competition now from superior leagues that MLS is a bit of a tough sell beyond the local markets. Giving the product away isn't going to move the needle. I'm not sure there's a whole lot that could be done to make the league more attractive generally. It still makes me sad that NFL stadiums can be filled to capacity for expensive, meaningless preseason scrimmages by big European clubs. But I suppose there are lots of reasons for that too. So we know there is interest in soccer out there. It just isn't convinced by MLS. I've never thought MLS would do promotion relegation given all of the money invested. Who's going to spend $500 million to get a team only to have it relegated to USL or whatever? What might work is expanding to so many teams that there ends up being MLS 1 and 2. The league will keep going. The league will keep spinning its wheels until the expansion money dries up. Yeah, which is pretty much what you said too, Kartik, in terms of the expansion side of things. At some point, that expansion will end. And by that point, maybe Don Garbo will have retired and will leave a big mess for whoever's going to take his position to build the next chapter of Major League Soccer.
Yeah, and I don't know what the next phase is in terms of revenue development, right? It may have to depend on local ticket sales and local sponsorships and that sort of thing, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but MLS has to have a plan in place to transition to that because they can't have 50 teams. And they're running out of markets where I think high level D1 soccer will be sustainable at the level they want it to be, where they're getting 20 or 25,000 a match, right? I mean, there are plenty of other markets, and again, there's this pro league standard thing we've talked about that that restricts who can own a team, where they can come from, what their where they can place a team, etc. But putting that aside for a minute, there is only a limited number of remaining mature soccer markets in the country which can sustain a club that draws over 20 or 25,000 fans a match for more than 2 or 3 seasons. I think anywhere MLS launches now, they'll get good attendance the first few years. But there are only a limited number of markets left. Sacramento is one, Tampa Bay, maybe Detroit. There are a few, Indianapolis. But you're running out of those places. So they have to have another plan. They have to transition at some point. Maybe that's the project for the person who replaces Don Garber.
Yeah, when you think about it, I mean, think about the Premier League, right? It's a global league, really. I mean, it's a league with global relevance. But what are the ingredients in the Premier League that makes people like us in the United States and other countries all around the world watch that league? And I would say, number one, it's, and this is not in order, but number one is the quality of soccer, high level of soccer. Number two would be the stars. And then number three, to me, would be really the promotion and relegation, the aspect of having clubs going up and down, seeing a Nottingham Forest, seeing a Brentford, seeing a Fulham, Aston Villa, and many, many other clubs too, going up the table, while clubs, whether it's Leeds or Leicester or Southampton, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, going down. And it's not that's not just for the Premier League in terms of promotion relegation. Promotion relegation is available and in place practically in every country in this world, except for a few. But to me, those are the ingredients that make the Premier League compelling. I'd add a fourth, and that's the production level in terms of how well the games are produced. So it's easy to watch. It's fun to watch. The quality level is high. So from those four things, what does MLS have? So I'd say the production level is actually good, not as good as the Premier League, but pretty close to it. Better than Serie A. So I'd say the production level is high. There is no promotion relegation. There are really no star players, and the quality level isn't. It's okay, but it's nothing great. So out of those four things, there's four ingredients that make one particular league, the most popular in the world. MLS has maybe one of those four things. So it's got a long way to go. And I think it has to be realistic. I mean, yes, it can bring in those star players into the league, but then that's two things out of the four. You're still missing those other ingredients to make it a really compelling league. All right, two more comments to go. Next up is John Ring. John Ring says, really enjoy your podcast that I recently found. I'm a huge soccer fan, season ticket holder to Cincinnati, and former season ticket holder to Columbus Crew. I want nothing more for soccer to become the US's biggest sport, but the MLS continues to shoot themselves in their feet. First, this deal with Apple is just dumb. Our league isn't even over 30 years old, yet MLS has now placed their vast majority of games behind a paywall, and they start at the same time. There's no way to grow the league for the casual fan with a subscription of $15 per month. Even though I have season tickets with friends, I haven't bought the subscription, nor will I. I know that there are some free games and a smattering of games on FS1, but not nearly enough. They also need to spread games out over 3 to 4 days and different start times. Second, the MLS continues to believe that the soccer fans want a similar league with 30 to 35 teams like the NFL or Major League Baseball with playoffs that include over half the teams. I do not. And I bet most soccer fans don't. I want a league of 20 teams, 24 max, with promotion and relegation. The excitement that is generated in the major leagues of Europe is amazing with promotion and relegation. Just look at Everton this year. We have to be different. We need to be different. My fear is that the MLS continues to. My fear is if MLS continues this Apple TV project and adds more teams, this league will become so diluted and a niche sports league in the US. Well, John, first of all, thank you for joining us on the podcast and being now a new regular listener. We appreciate you giving us a chance and hope you continue listening. Kartik, any final thoughts before we go to the last comment on this one?
No, I agree with a lot of what he has said there. So I think that the potential of falling to niche status because of the Apple deal is real, even though they took this money and got a ton of money in media rights, more than they would have gotten from a traditional media company. There is the risk of eyeballs falling away from the product.
Yeah, just to add one more thing to that too, and that was something that came from Chris Castle on Twitter, and he was saying, actually looked back at an article that he wrote from 2017, so 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago now, and he was saying at that time is that quite literally, he thought or he believed that the number of people watching MLS games on TV equaled the number of fans of MLS clubs. And what he means by that too is there are very few casual fans. Most of the fans that watch MLS games are probably season ticket holders or ticket goers. So by giving away the product for free to season ticket holders, now you're appealing to the casual fans. So now you're appealing to the soccer fans who want to give MLS Season Pass a chance and watch it. However, that audience doesn't exist for the most part, right? That audience has to be built and generated over time. And if you're appealing to the casual fans, what is the hook? What is the draw? Yes, the product of MLS is better in terms of no blackouts. You've got better production, some new teams in the league. But what is it that makes of interest to casual fans? There isn't that much yet. And even if there was, it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight too. So a whole host of problems for MLS to sort through. Last but not least, Dave has a comment. Kartik, he says, I would enjoy hearing more about Kartik's final topics. Number one, interplay between US soccer press and domestic leagues. And number two, spotty track records of the US WNT, NWSL stars in Europe. A lot of my domestic league soccer news is from World Soccer Talk and Football Americas, and I find both to be realists rather than homers. And I realize, Kartik, that's a lot. Those are some big questions with some big. We could probably do half an hour on each of those.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe we do specific pods on that, or one specific
Yep.
pod on those two topics, because that's those
Me too.
those are there's a lot there, and there's I think even more in terms of just the proprietary nature that many in women's soccer have towards the sport. They are very protective of the sport to the extent that they don't want other people giving commentary or giving their opinions about it, and that's an unhealthy thing.
Yeah,
I think.
to the
I mean,
detriment.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I'm a liberal person all around. So even though a lot of these people are self-professed liberals, they're not inclusive. So to me, they're being very closed
Yeah.
in the way they approach things. So that's. Thank you for the question. I think we'll have to do a whole pod on that.
All right, listeners, if you want to give us any of your feedback, any of your observations, experiences, or questions about soccer on TV and streaming, what shows you like and what shows you don't like, etc., get in touch with us. We'd love to read out your comments on air. There's a few different ways you can reach out to us. One is through email, which is web@worldsoccertalk.com. You can go to our website, worldsoccertalk.com, click on podcasts, and leave a comment in the most recent episode. There's also Twitter @worldsoccertalk, or you can go to Facebook and leave a message there. It's facebook.com/worldsoccertalk. And last but not least, you can leave a voicemail, just like the one we played last week. That one's 561-247-4625. And then, Kartik, where can listeners read your writings and also your team's writings, as well as the occasional podcast now and again, beyond World Soccer Talk?
Yeah, at beyondthe90.substack.com. You can check us out there. And obviously, you can follow me on Twitter at KKFLA737.
So, Kartik, this episode is in honor of your late father. Again, our condolences to you and your family. And just let us know if we can help out in any way. He's a great man and leaves behind a great legacy and a great son and family. And then
Thank
heading
you.
into...
Oh,
You're welcome.
sorry.
You're welcome.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris.
And then heading into another weekend of football from around the world, we're going to... The final week in the Premier League, and also final week in the Bundesliga, playoff finals. It's going to be a huge, huge, huge weekend. We will be back later this week, and we'll have a interview midweek also. So on behalf of everyone, thank you. And Kartik, what are you going to do, and what should the listeners do?
Enjoy your football.